Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Recalibrate podcast with me, your host, Leon Lopez. Today, we're discussing failure to launch, why young adults struggle to take off, right? And how do we help recalibrate their process to help them achieve success? Do you know, I think most of us know somebody who either has a kid or you know that kid themselves. And I'm not talking like a little kid. I'm talking like the high school age, maybe college age person who has just, for whatever reason, been incapable of leaving home, right? I mean, growing up is hard, but staying stuck is even harder. So today we're going to dive into a topic that a lot of families face, which is why are so many young adults and in particular young men struggling to launch into independent adulthood? You know, that term failure to launch, it's not just an individual challenge, right? But more of a reflection of broader concerns that include social, economic, and even psychological issues, right? I also want to touch on how some of these issues are impacting areas like our military recruitment specifically. There's an interesting article that I read, and I'm gonna talk about a couple of the highlights a little bit later, where they interviewed retired Army General William Enyart. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Enyart, Enyart. We'll talk about his perspectives on this as well. Okay, so what does that term even mean? Failure to launch. I think I know there was a movie made way back in the day with Matthew McConaughey, and it almost like glorified what it is to be a fucking burnout and stay at home and mooch off your parents forever. But the reality is it isn't that sexy. It isn't that fun to have your young adult living with you and draining you of everything. But I know it isn't that cut and dry or black and white. There are several issues that go into this, right? But, you know, what does it mean? Failure to launch in a nutshell. It's when a young person is either unwilling or ill-prepared to leave their family's home and live an independent life. Now, in my opinion, this problem starts to occur at home. And I'm looking at you, mom and dad, and it grows like a cancer over time. But there's some other players involved in this as well, and we're going to touch on that. High school is where this really takes shape, like these high school age boys and girls. You know, high school, it's a funny place. There's this misconception that it's a high school's responsibility to focus on preparing students for adulthood, at least young adulthood, right? And in my opinion, that just couldn't be further from the truth, especially if you're a teen that attends the public school system. You know, remember, think back if it's been several years since you were in high school, the kids that wore all those top 25 college hoodies around school, Georgetown or SC or something like that. I do, because I was one of those kids. I used to wear a Stanford sweatshirt hoodie all the time, telling my buddies that I was going to Stanford. Just completely delusional. I wasn't going. I wasn't prepared. I had no idea what was expected or what the obligation would be for something of that magnitude. And I went to a small school. The expectation that counselors or all the teachers are going to guide you is nothing more than a dream and a lie in many cases that we tell our kids. I don't even think my counselors knew my name. And again, I went to a very small school. My senior class, we graduated less than 100. It was like 96 kids that graduated. Now, disclaimer here, okay? Pump the brakes. This is not a knock on teachers. Teachers have a tough job, very, very tough job, and a thankless one most of the time. I don't blame teachers. I just want to clarify on this. It's just the opposite. There's too much emphasis and an unrealistic expectation that it's their job to guide every kid that passes through their class. No, it's not their job, man. Meanwhile, parents are not as engaged as they should be, and the kid themselves, in many cases, could care less. Now, I have my own thoughts on what we should focus on in high schools across the nation, but I'm leaving that for another episode. We're not going to discuss that today. My point with this is that high school is the first realization that it's what you make of it. No one is going to give you anything. You can't rely on someone to always hold your hand, okay? My future, just to go back down memory lane here for a sec, my future depended on my parents talking to me, helping me, and realistically doing research on my own. And, this was mid-'90s, so well before the internet, at least the internet we know today. My parents didn't tell me exactly what I should do. Instead, they just encouraged me to get out there and figure out what was available and what I wanted to do, figure out what I wanted to do. That may sound like great advice, right? But as I'm saying it, it sounds better than how it really was. I mean, what does an 18-year-old know? Nothing, right? I mean, after all, you don't know what you don't know. We need guidance at that age. And if you're a parent, you need to give guidance, constant guidance, checking in with them to ensure that they're on the right path. But there's a parental line that separates guidance and being overbearing. Another part of this is the individual initiative in self-starting. Okay, I see a far less emphasis for younger people today to get motivated and catapult themselves into adulthood. And I don't mean to sound like the old guy rocking back and forth on his chair on his front porch, yelling at kids to stay off his lawn. I don't want to turn this episode into one of those type things. But man, there's a lot of distractions out there, and with all these distractions, most people tend to spend a little less time on themselves, and that's a major issue. I see these patterns in a lot of teenagers today. And conversations I have with friends or family or just hearing stories from people I know, there's a serious issue with young people growing up and leaving the nest that mom and dad have created. But to be fair, there's a lot of issues younger people are facing that may be holding them back. And I shouldn't overgeneralize or point fingers when it comes to this, right? I get it. The reasons can be complicated, and it's generally not just one factor that determines a failure to launch. So, what are the roots of young people failing to launch? Okay, we got to start with the economic challenges, and we'll just start right here. I know we're towards the end of 2024, but let's look at the economic challenges in 2024 going into 25. The rising cost of living has made it difficult, borderline impossible for young adults, especially, I live here in California, especially if you live here in California, but for young adults to afford their independence. Housing prices, rent, the daily expenses have fucking skyrocketed, making it nearly impossible, man, for those with, like, if you have an entry-level job or student debt, it makes it impossible for you to move out. So as a result, young people are forced to stay in the comforts of their parents' home longer than, the generations before them, which, of course, delays the transition to full adulthood. There's a lot of financial pressure out there. And, that financial pressure, it also delays the ability to save or invest in their future. Well, one of the main issues, these financial issues that they face, is student debt. Student debt has been a problem for years. And now let me just jump in here and start by saying I don't support, and I'm not saying the government should bail you out and forgive the debt that you decided to take on. No. You want to go to one of these crazy high-priced schools and pay these ridiculous prices, that's on you. Don't expect the government to come in later and bail that out. That's just absolutely ridiculous. But the cost of higher learning is disgusting, with absolutely no guarantee for a job following your little education journey, right? This turns out to be one of the worst investments for a lot of people. The student loan payments can be absolutely crippling, and especially if you're having trouble with bills already. There are huge consequences for defaulting on student loans, and you may not even get enough to begin with. This is one of the most important factors when we're looking at why someone hasn't left home yet. Now, there's a lot of debate to this next one, and that's when it comes to job market instability. When I look online, just when I'm driving around, I see listings for jobs and career paths everywhere. I don't think it's a shortage of jobs, but rather there's an unrealistic expectation of the kind of job someone, i.e. young people, what they're willing to accept. No one wants to learn a skill anymore or start from the bottom. It just seems like everyone is a fucking entrepreneur these days, or worse, an influencer. I kind of look at those hopeful career paths like, the way it was years ago and becoming an actor or a pro athlete. It sounds great. And maybe you're good at it. Like, why not you, right? But where's the true serum in this? Not everyone is going to make it. So have a backup plan. Learn a skill. This is where the failure to launch kind of takes root. When you don't make your little entrepreneur or the next big TikToker face reality because you're protecting them, mom and dad, or when you don't make them face consequences or responsibilities, then don't expect a responsible outcome. So let's talk about that, right? Our parents, the problem when it comes to someone failing to launch. First, before we look at the parent's role with young people failing to launch, I want to say not every issue at home is self-inflicted. Many people today suffer from a variety of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, amongst others. There's a whole laundry list of them now that we can go down, but this is not the show to go into the struggles that families face with mental health issues. I'm talking about the able-bodied young person that chooses to avoid growing up and contributing. Now, I've met overprotective or the helicopter parents. That thick layer of protection or hovering over their comfort level can unintentionally hold their young adult back. This is usually where the mama bears of the world will start arguing with me, right? Like, hey, don't tell me I know how to raise, blah, 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 blah. To them, I say, you're just making shitty humans, okay? Don't give them a false expectation of reality. You raise a 20-something to think that they're God's gift to everyone, it's going to be very hard for them when they get a job and the boss comes up to them and tells them they're lazy, they're late, or they're not good enough at the job that they're actually doing, okay? But in addition to that overprotective parent, or the one that's just kind of delusional on how great their kid is, there's also the lazy or the presently absent parent. The ones that don't engage enough at all. They let their 19, 20, 25-year-old play video games till 2 a.m, wake up late, and just simply get by with some half-assed part-time job. There's no expectation to engage in life, just get by or drain government benefits. Years pass by until one day that same parent is fed up and tells them to finally get out and get a job. Meanwhile, that lazy parent did absolutely nothing to prepare them. I like to make the argument, there's no bad kids, only bad parenting. And if you're listening to this and that stings a little bit, well, the truth hurts, okay? Now, when the environment isn't right at home, from the beginning, it's so hard for young people to jump into the real world and go to work when it's time to leave home. it's not a light switch, right? Bad parenting causes that fear of failure or low self-esteem. That comfortable home environment you make with minimal financial responsibilities, this contributes to a lack of motivation to move out and to get a young person to pursue their own independence. You know, these issues, they don't just impact the individual young person, right? I mean, they affect our nation's readiness too. Our military recruitment levels are some of the lowest they have ever been. I mentioned earlier that article that I had read. It was retired Army General, Army Major General William Enyart. And he talked about, and when I read this, I had to read it a couple times, but he talks about how 77% of young Americans ages 17 to 24, and that's kind of the age gap we're looking at with this failure launch. But 77% young Americans ages 17 to 24 are physically unfit for military service. That is beyond embarrassing and just absolutely shocking to read that. The rising rates of obesity is leading to young people being physically disqualified from military service. Now, where does this come from? And how are we okay with this as a nation? I think one of the main reasons is the constant availability of different types of entertainment. You know, social media is such a distraction for any young adult focusing on trying to better themselves, you know, getting ready physically, focusing on their goals, or in just some cases, just forming relationships. And I want to say our schools don't get a pass on this issue either, okay? This is the result when you remove PE, you know, we all remember PE in schools, but when you remove PE from schools, and I know there's some out there because they've already told me this when I talk about this sidebar. Someone's going to say, oh, PE still exists. All right, but give me a break. You know, they get the option to walk. Students get the options to walk. There's very little formed curriculum when it comes to athletic readiness. You know, imagine you go to school and walk on a track. And in many cases, they just get to sit down and look at their phones as long as they change into their gym clothes. So with that lack of leadership within our education system, it's no wonder why we're spitting out these skinny fat kids. And what a horrible phrase, skinny fat kids. This is not mine. That's the one that the general used in the article. But we all know that skinny fat kid. Like, you look at them and they're like, oh, they look, you know, in shape. They're not like crazy obese, but they don't have any muscle tone to their body whatsoever. You know, the general did discuss mental health or the mental health crisis impacting enlistment, but also the social and the behavioral factors like drugs and criminal records. And, you know, hey, even here in 2024, I know drug use and guys breaking the law is nothing new. I mean, it's been going on for decades. But the numbers are up nationwide. I think this stems from piss poor parenting, right? That's where it starts. Overcrowded schools with, you know, lack of oversight, especially through the high school ranks. And, you know, here I go, old man on the porch, but the glamorization of shitty behavior on social media platforms. The young people are watching this stuff day in, day out, and it just becomes their social norm in their own heads, and they think it's okay to do it. So I ask myself, do young people even want to join the military anymore? When as I'm reading this article, I was at a dinner party one time, and such an old thing to say at dinner party, but I was just at dinner with a bunch of different parents, and this topic came up. It was maybe like a year ago. And the overall feeling was from the other parents was that the military is just a last resort for young people. And man, I was shocked with the amount of people I talked to that shared this same opinion. A last resort, okay? And I think that boils down to a lack of understanding of what the military is and what they offer. And there's also this fairy tale that so many people have grown to believe that college is the goal, that college is the only way a young person can be successful. And it drives me fucking crazy. Understanding what the military is, what they do day in and day out, and spoiler alert, it isn't war, okay? The movies have kind of glamorized that. If you join the military, every single person, male or female, is going to war. That's not it. Many people who are in their military career, many veterans never saw war once. It is a possibility. And with certain jobs, yeah, it's a high possibility. But it isn't guaranteed, not even close, okay? But that's the expectation. So they don't know what the military does day to day, and or what they offer. It's just as important. Let me rephrase that. What the military offers is just as important as pushing these high-priced colleges down young people's throats. So the parents who are in the school systems who have just kind of groomed us to believe that, hey, you go from, K through 12 and you automatically go into a college. No, there are other options out there. And most young people at the age of 18, they're not ready. Mentally, they are not ready to take on a higher learning in most cases. Not every case. There's some squared away kids out there with great parents. I do want to applaud those folks and acknowledge them as well. This is not a one-size-fits-all episode, but there are some folks out there who need to hear this and understand that don't just get into that habit of pushing college like it's the only option. That's just what we've kind of been groomed to believe. Okay, well, all right, let me move on here. So when we look at young adults struggling to find their footing as they transition into adulthood, we see some common challenges right across the board. Many of them aren't prepared to handle the practical demands of independence. When it comes to managing finances, just balancing the day-to-day responsibilities, or developing any sort of a consistent work ethic. And not even to get into specifics, but ask a kid about healthcare benefits. Hell, ask them if they know how to pump gas or change a tire, okay? Some of those things I mentioned, these are some of the same qualities that the military expects in their recruits. Now, I'm not talking about the change in tire thing, but, balancing responsibilities or that work ethic. It's about discipline, resilience, just being able to work within a structured environment. But if a young person hasn't had a chance to build these skills, then, making that jump into military service or any high structured job, it can be a serious shock to the system, man. Think about it. Today's young people are facing a lot of pressure. I will acknowledge that. They're told they have to get it all figured out immediately. And this is a fast-paced world, man. From the moment we wake up, responsible people, we're moving. But a lot of them haven't had the opportunity, a lot of the young people haven't had the opportunity to practice the skills they'll need in the real world. Maybe they didn't grow up with the responsibilities like a job or contributing at home, right, with chores and stuff like that, or managing their own money. Mom and dad have done it for them. So when they're suddenly expected to handle these big responsibilities on their own, whether it's in a career or the military or any major life commitment, I get it. It can feel overwhelming. And, this highlights some bigger issues, okay? We, as a society, need to think about how we are preparing young people for the real world. Schools, families, just communities in general, we could do a better job in teaching practical skills, especially in the school environment, the education system. We can do a better job to reinforce accountability and promote resilience. If you can help your young person to build a solid foundation, man, they're going to be ready to thrive. Trust me. I've seen it. I've experienced it. Now, whether that's in the workforce or the military or any path they choose, okay? So, looking at what we've talked about, at the end of the day, this all circles back to the same core issues. Our young people, our teens, these people who mean the world to us, they are struggling to truly grow up. Between the high living costs, questionable parenting, I'll put it that way, culture that overdiagnoses every little thing as a crisis, addictions, whether to drugs or to technology, and just a general lack of accountability. It's no wonder why so many young adults feel stuck. And this isn't affecting them individually, it's impacting the fabric of our entire society. We've got to do better at mentoring and developing our young people. Who's we? Parents, schools, to start with, at a minimum. If you're a parent with young people, if you're a school, from the teachers to the counselors to the superintendent, that's who I'm talking about right now. Encouraging them to spread their wings, right? We need to show them all the paths available after high school and make it crystal clear that lounging around at home, well into your 20s and playing video games, that's not an option, man. You can't fucking promote that. You can't enable your young person to think that that's okay. There's a big world out there. And it's time to get them out and ready to tackle it. So if you or someone is facing the so-called failure to launch, remember this, okay? It starts with small steps. Let's recalibrate our thinking with this. Starts with small steps. Learn a few life skills. Doesn't have to be anything major, but learn a few life skills. What will be important for them going into their future? Seek support for any sort of mental health issues. I mean, that's kind of an obvious one if you need it. And most importantly, start making a plan for your future. This is a combination. It is a group effort between the young adult, between the parents, the school system, and anyone else who can help contribute. I mean, we all know different people, friends, family, that can help guide us and give us options into our futures. Independence doesn't happen overnight, right? But each step gets you a little bit closer. We'll leave it that, okay? I get it. This can be a heavy one for some parents. When we're dealing with our kids and our close ones, but I just feel very strongly that this is a necessary one, that sometimes we all could use a kick in the butt, whether you're that young person or the parent who needs to help get that kid to giddy up, okay? Anyway, listen, hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Recalibrate podcast. Let's keep these conversations going, and let's keep pushing for positive change. Until next time, stay strong, stay focused, and as always, wherever your path has led you, no matter how hard life can be, no matter how far you've fallen, you're not done. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.